Sir, stop right there. Let me see your ID.
Why? What is going on?
Just give me your ID right now.
I paid. I have the receipt in my hand. What item are you saying is missing?
You were acting suspicious. That's enough. ID.
Well, what facts do you have?
Officer Brent Walsh walked into Front Range Outfitters and decided on the spot that a black customer near the exit was a shoplifter. He moved in close, demanded identification, and positioned himself so the man couldn't just walk out, even though nobody had confirmed a missing item. Walsh expected the situation to end the usual way. The customer gets nervous, backs down, hands over whatever the officer wants, and the story becomes whatever the officer says it is. What he did not know was that the calm black man standing near the exit with the receipt in his hand was a head of internal affairs. And he definitely was not the kind of person Walsh could bully without consequences. At this moment, we want to tell you that we're genuinely grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support is what keeps this channel alive and going. Now tell us where you're watching from in the comments, your country or state. And if you like stories where people stay calm, stick to facts, and the record catches up with the truth, hit like and subscribe. This started in Marston, Colorado, inside a mid-sized outdoor store called Front Range Outfitters in a busy shopping district. The front of the store was set up like most retail places, registers close to the entrance and exit, a small open area where people paused after paying, and cameras covering the checkout lanes. A cashier noticed Darius Coleman near the exit and told the officer she wasn't sure about him. That was it. No confirmed missing item, no alarm, no manager saying a product was gone. Just uncertainty. Walsh treated that uncertainty like a confirmed theft. He went straight at Darius and demanded his ID. Darius stayed still, kept his hands visible, and asked why he was being questioned. He asked what item was supposedly taken and what facts Walsh had. Walsh did not give a specific item. He did not reference a report from staff that a product was missing. He kept it general and kept repeating that he believed Darius took something. He also stood close enough that Darius had to look past him to see the doors. The point was clear. Walsh was controlling where Darius could move, even though nothing had been verified. Darius did not match Walsh's energy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get aggressive. He repeated the same questions because those questions matter. What is the reason and what is the actual basis? Walsh started labeling Darius's questions as non-compliance. That's how he pushed it. He acted like the problem wasn't the lack of evidence, but Darius not immediately doing what he was told. Then Walsh radioed for backup. The language he used made it sound like he had an active suspect situation, not a store trying to confirm a receipt. That radio call mattered because it shaped how the next officer would arrive and how serious the situation would feel, especially to customers watching. A store manager stepped in and asked for a minute to verify the purchase. That was the normal next step. Check the receipt against the point-of-sale system and confirm the transaction. Darius already had the receipt in hand and stayed in place while the manager worked. Walsh did not slow down while the manager verified. He kept pressing Darius for ID. He stayed in Darius's space. He kept himself positioned between Darius and the exit. The encounter was now happening right between the registers and the front doors, with customers nearby and store cameras looking down on the whole area. When backup arrived, Officer Sofia Ramirez took a moment to read what was actually in front of her. She saw a normal checkout scene, a manager actively verifying, and a customer holding a receipt and bag. She hesitated because it didn't match the urgency Walsh had put on the radio. Walsh reacted by trying to take control of the scene even harder. He kept directing attention back to his commands and tried to move the situation toward hands-on control, even though the store was still verifying the purchase. That's what made the moment stand out later. It didn't look like an officer waiting for facts. It looked like an officer trying to force a result before the facts cleared the customer. And here's the detail that turned this from a bad stop into a major case later on. Front Range Outfitters store video stayed clear. The camera angles covered the registers in the exit area. The lighting was good. The timing was easy to follow. Walsh's body camera, which should have captured the most important part of the confrontation, ended up unusable at the critical moment. not the whole interaction, the part that mattered most. In real time, nobody in the store could see how big that would become. They saw an officer pushing a shoplifting accusation without a confirmed missing item, a manager trying to verify, a backup officer hesitating, and Darius staying controlled and asking for a clear reason. That was where it stood right then. Walsh still trying to turn suspicion into control, and Darius refusing to hand him anything he could misuse. The manager finished checking the transaction and confirmed Darius's purchase matched the receipt. There was no missing item tied to him. The store had no loss report, no product description, no inventory alert, nothing that supported what Walsh had been pushing. That should have ended it clean. Instead, Walsh tried to keep the situation on his terms. He stayed close, kept talking like Darius had still needed to prove himself, and acted like the only issue was Darius not cooperating fast enough. He did not switch to an apology. He did not acknowledge that the cashier's uncertainty was not a valid basis for what he'd done. He tried to turn it into a lecture and move on. Officer Ramirez didn't follow Walsh's lead. She stayed focused on what the manager had confirmed. Her posture and pacing made it obvious she didn't see a reason to keep pressing Darius now that the store verification was done. The contrast mattered because anyone watching could see there had been a normal way to handle this, and Walsh chose the aggressive way. Darius kept the same approach he'd used the entire time. He stayed calm. He didn't argue about emotions, and he didn't make it personal. He kept it simple and fact-based. He made it clear he was leaving now that the purchase was verified, and he did it without giving Walsh a reaction to claim later. Walsh still tried to control the ending. He lingered, watched Darius move, and looked for a final excuse to justify how far he'd taken it. But with the manager confirming the purchase and another officer standing there, he didn't have room to force it further without exposing himself even more. Darius walked out of Front Range Outfitters as a customer who had done nothing wrong, in front of a store camera that had captured the full encounter from start to finish. That same day, Darius handled it the way a person trained in oversight handled it, through process, not performance. He did not call anyone from the parking lot. He did not threaten anyone. He did not announce who he was to get special treatment. He went through the same public system any resident would use, so the case would be anchored in normal procedure from the first step. He filed a complaint through the department's public channel. He wrote it as a clean timeline, describing what the cashier reported, what Walsh did, what Walsh claimed, how the manager verified the purchase, and how Walsh escalated without a confirmed missing item. He included location details, time window, and identifying information that would help investigators pull the right records. Then he sent a preservation request. He didn't just ask for the body cam. He asked for the full set of material that would show what happened and what decisions were made before and after. He requested preservation of full body cam files, not clips. He requested dispatch and CAD logs. He requested GPS and unit location records. He requested supervisor communications. He requested store video. And he requested POS logs for the transaction and surrounding time window so the verification could be tied to system records. He also requested that no one involved in the incident access or alter-related files. That preservation step was not a dramatic move. It was a standard one. And it mattered because it locked the department into a record before anyone could start cleaning up the story. Only after that process started did the internal reality surface. Darius wasn't just a citizen filing a complaint. He was the department's internal affairs director. Even then, he handled it carefully because he understood what would happen if he touched the case himself. People would say it was personal. People would say it was biased. People would say he used his position to settle a score. So he did the opposite. He formally recused himself from the investigation in writing. He assigned the case to his deputy, Monica Lane, with clear instructions. Treat it like any other complaint, follow chain of custody, and document every step. Monica Lane moved fast because she knew the first 48 hours mattered most in cases involving video and digital logs. She issued evidence holds, not suggestions. Holds. She directed that body cam files, dispatch recordings, CAD entries, and system access logs be preserved immediately. She notified IT and supervision, so nobody could later claim they didn't know material had to be protected. She also contacted Front Range Outfitters to secure the store's exports properly. She didn't accept someone texting a clip. She arranged formal exports with timestamps, system identifiers, and documented handling. She treated the store video and POS logs as evidence, not content. When she received the store footage, she logged it, verified it, and preserved the original export. She documented who provided it, when it was pulled, and how it was transferred. That mattered because the store video was going to be the cleanest, most neutral record of what happened at the front doors. The department's initial reaction was quiet containment. Walsh was pulled to administrative duty. He was instructed not to access case-related materials. On paper, that looked like standard procedure while a complaint was reviewed. But Lane treated it as a risk point because she knew what sometimes happened when an officer believed video or reports could end their career. She began building the timeline the right way: store video timestamps, POS verification times, dispatch calls, and officer arrival windows. She started lining up the records that should match each other if everything was normal, and she flagged one issue immediately for follow-up. Walsh's body cam coverage didn't match what it should have captured. The store video had a clear view during the most critical part of the encounter, but the body cam record from Walsh wasn't clean in that same window. That mismatch was going to become a major point, because it wasn't just about what happened in the store. It was about whether the official police record had been protected or manipulated. Lane didn't jump to conclusions. She did what investigators do. She treated it as a technical problem until the logs proved otherwise. But she also knew something important already. Walsh's decisions were now locked against a clear store camera angle, and Darius had already requested the full set of records that would show who touched what and when. Monica Lane treated the complaint like an evidence case. She rebuilt what happened using records that could be checked and matched. She started with the store side because it was outside police control. She obtained the full camera export covering the registers and the exit, along with the POS logs for the same time window. She documented who pulled the video when it was exported, how it was transferred, and she preserved the original file while working from a copy. Then she built a timeline. She matched the receipt and POS transaction time to the store video timestamps, and then matched those to dispatch and CAD records, showing when Walsh was sent to the store, when he arrived, and when he called for backup. That let her line up what the store cameras showed with what Walsh was telling dispatch in real time. After that, she pulled police video the correct way. She requested the full original Bodycam file, not a shortened clip or a view-only copy, and she requested the technical records tied to it: docking and upload records, file identifiers, and system access logs. That's where the case shifted. The store video stayed clear during the critical part of the encounter, including Walsh pressing Darius for ID near the exit, restricting his movement, and pushing the situation toward physical control while the manager was still verifying the purchase. Walsh's body cam did not stay intact during that same window. The most important portion was unusable. Lane didn't treat that as a simple camera issue and move on. She checked the file records. She pulled metadata tied to the recording and upload, and she pulled audit logs showing what actions were taken with the file. She also pulled workflow records to compare what normally happened to body cam footage versus what happened here. Those logs showed the body cam file had been handled outside the normal process. That meant it wasn't just a bad recording. The system recorded that the file was interacted with in a way that didn't match standard handling. Once she had that, she widened the review. She pulled Walsh's recent cases and looked for repeat markers, vague suspicion language in reports, unusually frequent claims of consent searches, low rates of charges after those searches, and body cam problems appearing around the same kinds of moments. The pattern was consistent. It looked like broad suspicion language was being used to justify stops. Searches were happening often without strong outcomes, and video issues clustered around searches, handcuffing, and later claims about resistance. While Lane was building the case, the department tried to keep the situation contained. Walsh was placed on administrative duty and ordered not to access any case-related material. He still attempted to access the case. The system logged the attempt. That access log changed the risk level immediately. Lane added it to the file and notified command through the chain. She then prepared a referral package that included the store video and POS confirmation showing no theft, the dispatch and CAD timeline showing how Walsh framed the situation on the radio, the body cam integrity issues supported by metadata and audit logs, Walsh's attempted access after being ordered not to, and a summary showing the pattern concerns were not isolated to one incident. At that point, it stopped being a simple internal discipline matter. The focus shifted to civil rights exposure and evidence integrity, and outside review moved quickly. Once Monica Lane's referral package left the department, things moved in a different lane. The issue was no longer whether Walsh used poor judgment in a store. The issue was whether he violated someone's rights and whether evidence was mishandled to protect him. The department tried one last round of quiet control. They kept Walsh on administrative duty, restricted his access, and avoided public statements beyond standard language. Internally, they acted like it could be handled with discipline and training, but the records didn't support that. Federal review focused on two tracks at the same time. First, the stop itself. Walsh treated Darius like a thief without a confirmed missing item, restricted his movement by positioning himself at the exit, and used non-compliance language to justify escalation while the store manager was actively verifying the purchase. Second, the evidence. The body cam failure during the critical window, the audit logs showing handling outside the normal workflow, and Walsh's attempted access after being told not to touch the case. That last part mattered more than people think. It showed intent and risk. You can argue about a bad decision in the moment. It is much harder to explain why evidence got handled wrong and why the officer later tried to get into the file. Walsh was terminated after the internal process concluded, based on policy violations tied to the stop and the evidence issues. The city and department had to move fast because by then, the case wasn't isolated. Lane's broader review had already surfaced a pattern in Walsh's unit: repeated vague suspicion language, high consent search claims with low charges, and video gaps clustering around the same high-risk moments. That pattern triggered a larger response. The unit was shut down and restructured. Supervisors were reassigned. Stop documentation requirements were tightened. Body cam audits became mandatory, not occasional. The department added stricter review around consent searches and required clearer articulation of the reason for stops, not generic language that could fit anything. Then the civil side hit. Once the unit pattern became visible, the city faced multiple civil suits tied to similar stop and search behavior. Some cases had the same story structure: vague suspicion, pressure tactics, searches with little outcome, and recording gaps at key moments. The city ended up settling multiple cases connected to that pattern because the records created exposure that was difficult to defend. On the criminal side, federal prosecutors brought civil rights and evidence-related charges against Walsh. The case was built around what could be verified: the store video and POS logs, the dispatch CAD timeline, the mismatch between what the store footage showed and what the body cam failed to capture, and the system logs showing unusual handling and attempted access. The point was not just that Walsh was wrong. The point was that he escalated without a proper basis, and then the evidence trail didn't stay clean. Walsh was convicted. he was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. And that outcome didn't happen because someone got loud or went viral. It happened because the record was preserved early, the evidence was secured properly, and the investigation was run in a way that held up under outside review. Darius's role became public during the process, not during the confrontation. He didn't use it to win the moment in the store. He used procedure to win the case afterward. He filed through the public channel, locked down preservation, recused himself, and let his deputy do the work. That's what prevented anyone from dismissing it as personal. Monica Lane's work became a model inside that department. The chain of custody steps, the timeline matching, the metadata pulls, the audit log review, the unit pattern analysis, and the documentation of Walsh's access attempt turned a messy incident into a provable case. The long-term change in Marston was concrete. Officers had to document stops with clearer factual basis. Supervisors had to review stops more consistently. Bodycam audits became routine and tracked. The department introduced stricter controls and alerts around bodycam file handling and access. The goal was simple: make it harder for vague suspicion to become a detention, and make it harder for evidence gaps to hide what happened. That's what accountability looks like when it's done the right way. Calm, documented, verified, and impossible to hand-wave away later. Now let me ask you something. If you were Darius in that store, would you have stayed as controlled as he did? Or would you have reacted the way most people would when an officer treats suspicion like proof? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you've ever had a situation where the truth only mattered because you had the record, share that too. And if you want more stories where people stay calm, stick to facts, and the system is forced to answer for what it did, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.
Sir, step out onto the porch. Hands where I can see them.
My hands are visible. I'm staying in the threshold. Show the warrant on camera and confirm the address.
We'll talk out here. Step outside first, then we'll show you paperwork.
No. First, you explain to me what is going on.
Sir, give me your name and date of birth. Prove you live here.
Just after midnight, an ICE team boxed in the Pierce residence like they were sealing off a scene, not knocking on a door. Vehicles angled in tight. Bright lights flooded the yard and front porch. Agents in tactical vests took positions across the property line and driveway, watching the front door like they expected someone to run. Adrian Pierce stepped into the doorway and stayed there, hands visible, body still. No sudden movements. He didn't step into the yard and he didn't let them control the space. He kept the interaction on one condition. The team needed to present the warrant in a way that could be recorded, and they needed to confirm the address before anything moved forward. The lead agent, Travis Harlow, tried to turn that into a compliance problem. He pushed for Adrian to exit first. He treated the request for documentation as refusal to cooperate. He used authority tone and urgency to force a sequence where Adrian would be outside, exposed, and easier to manage. Julia Pierce moved into position behind Adrian and made the next part hard to rewrite later. She announced the doorbell camera and exterior cameras were recording and actively saving. She started documenting out loud who was present, how the vehicles were positioned, and the fact that the lead agent was refusing to present the warrant on camera. And before we go any further, we want to tell you this straight. We're genuinely grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and lets us keep telling stories where people hold the line and the record stays clean. Now drop where you're watching from in the comments, your state or your country. And if you like stories about staying calm, getting things on camera, and forcing officials to follow procedure, hit like and subscribe. Here's how it started, because this moment didn't come out of nowhere. The Pierces had been home, winding down, and the neighborhood was quiet. Then the alert hit. Julia checked the doorbell feed first and saw multiple vehicles pulling in fast and lights snapping on. She didn't open the door to see what was going on. She treated it like a situation that could turn into a report later. She verified that recordings were saving, then positioned herself where her voice would be captured clearly. Adrian approached the door with the same discipline. He didn't rush. He didn't shout questions through glass. He positioned himself at the threshold where the legal line is clear. He understood what that line means at night, with lights in your face and agents trying to control the rhythm. Harlow approached like the goal was speed. He tried to control the order. Step out, then talk. That order matters because the moment a person exits, the space becomes the agent's environment. Lighting angles, distance, and movement all start working against the homeowner. It also gives the team more room to claim they saw something or interpreted something a certain way. Adrian didn't give him that. He kept repeating that he needed the warrant presented on camera and the address verified. He didn't argue about politics. He didn't argue about the agency. He kept it narrow and legal, authority first, movement second. Harlow tried to reframe it. He described Adrian's position as non-compliance. He pushed the idea that Adrian was required to follow instructions first and ask questions later. He tried to make the request for paperwork sound like a stalling tactic. Julia made that harder by documenting every choice out loud. She requested names and badge numbers. She noted vehicle markings and plates when they were visible. She stated that the team was refusing to produce the warrant in a recordable way. She didn't insult anyone. She didn't escalate. She kept it factual and timestamped. That's when Harlow shifted tactics. He pushed for the door to open wider. He tried to shorten the distance and control the doorway conversation. He kept pressing for Adrian to step outside because he needed the setting to change. Adrian stayed in the same place and stayed controlled. No back and forth. No emotional performance. Just the same requirement, repeated the same way. Julia then requested a supervisor while recording. That changed the situation because it forced the lead agent to bring someone higher ranking into a scene that was already being documented. It also meant the decision to withhold the warrant on camera would no longer be something Harlow could keep informal or ambiguous. Harlow resisted at first, but the longer the team stayed under bright lights at a residence without producing the warrant on camera, the worse it looked. He radioed up for supervision. While they waited, the neighborhood started reacting. Lights and vehicles at that hour don't stay private. A neighbor across the street watched from inside and began recording from their own angle. That mattered because it created a second timeline outside of the Pierce cameras, capturing how the team arrived and how they positioned vehicles. Then Supervisor Dana Kessler arrived. She didn't approach like she was there to bully her way through a doorway. She approached like someone who understood exposure and oversight. She started asking what the objective was and why the warrant hadn't been presented in a recordable way yet. She looked at Adrian at the threshold, then at her team's posture, then back at the house cameras that were clearly active. Adrian still didn't step outside. He still didn't give them yard control. But now the scene had a supervisor, multiple recordings, and a growing paper trail that would exist whether the team wanted it or not. And at that point, Adrian made a choice that was about to change the tone of everything that happened next. He prepared to disclose who he was, carefully, calmly, and on record, because this wasn't going to stay a midnight intimidation attempt. It was about to become a documented incident with consequences. With Supervisor Dana Kessler now on the scene, the interaction stopped being a one-person pressure push and became a situation that had to make sense in writing later. Kessler looked at the cameras, looked at Adrian holding position at the threshold, and focused on what the team was relying on to be there. Adrian didn't announce anything loudly, he didn't try to intimidate anyone. He stayed controlled and made a clean disclosure under recording conditions. He identified himself as a federal judge and presented identification in a way that could be seen by the doorbell camera and the exterior view. He did it carefully, without stepping into the yard or changing the boundary. Julia stayed in documentation mode. She made sure her phone captured the moment as a backup angle and continued stating key details out loud. The supervisor's arrival, the fact that the lead agent had been refusing to present the warrant on camera, and that Adrian had requested address confirmation from the start. Kessler's posture shifted right after the ID was shown. She stopped treating the doorway like a place where commands would solve the problem and started treating it like a scene that could become a legal incident if mishandled. She asked for the warrant to be produced and asked her team to confirm the target address. Agent Travis Harlow didn't like the change. He had been trying to control the sequence. Now the sequence was being controlled by procedure. Under the supervisor's direction, he produced the paperwork in a way that could be recorded. It wasn't a casual wave of a document from 10 feet away. It was presented in a way where the key fields could be captured on video. That's where the night turned. The address on the warrant did not match the Pierce residence. Not close. Not a typo that could be shrugged off. It was a different address tied to a different location. The number and street were wrong for that house. The legal authority the team claimed at the door did not apply to the people standing behind it. You could see the confidence collapse in real time, not through emotion, but through body language and behavior changes. The lead agent stopped pressing for Adrian to step outside. The team's posture moved from forward pressure to quick containment. Kessler redirected the focus away from the door and back toward her own team, checking what happened, how it happened, and what would be captured on camera. Harlow tried to pivot to a quick exit. The team started repositioning like they wanted to leave without creating more record than already existed. No explanation that matched the intensity of the approach. No accountability language. Just movement toward a quiet retreat. Adrian didn't allow that. He kept his voice level and kept the interaction procedural. He requested the names and badge numbers of the personnel involved. He requested the supervisor's name and the unit details. He requested an incident number or case reference tied to the attempted contact. He also requested confirmation on record that the warrant address did not match his residence. Julia reinforced the record. She captured vehicle plates when they turned. She noted unit markings. She repeated the requests out loud so the footage would show what was being asked and what was being avoided. She didn't argue. She documented. This is where agencies often tried to do the minimum. When the operation goes wrong, the instinct is to reduce the footprint, keep details vague, and leave before the homeowner can collect identifiers. Harlow followed that instinct. He gave as little as possible and tried to move the team out. Kessler had a different problem. She couldn't pretend this hadn't happened, not with multiple cameras recording and a neighbor now watching from across the street. She couldn't treat it like a normal wrong door, sorry moment, because the approach itself had been heavy and the warrant had not been presented promptly. She also couldn't ignore who was standing in that doorway. So she did what supervisors do when they're trying to limit damage while still making the moment survivable on paper. She acknowledged the mismatch in a controlled way, kept the interaction short, and directed the team to disengage. Adrian stayed steady and made sure the final minutes weren't empty. He asked again for the case reference and the correct point of contact for follow-up. He made it clear the footage would be preserved and that formal requests would follow. Julie continued to speak in time-stamped facts. She noted when the team began withdrawing, which vehicles moved first, and which personnel avoided providing identifiers. She captured the last clear shots of plates and markings before the vehicles cleared the property. Within minutes, the yard lighting disappeared. The angled vehicles pulled out. The street went quiet again. But the incident didn't end when the engines left. The key part was already locked in. A documented approach, pressure before verification, delayed warrant presentation, and a warrant that didn't match the house they surrounded. And the Pierces were not going to let that turn into a clean, undocumented mistake that disappeared into internal paperwork. As soon as the vehicles cleared the street, the Pierces shifted from surviving the moment to building the record. Julia didn't wait until morning. She exported the doorbell footage and the exterior camera angles immediately. and save them in more than one place. She pulled the timestamps, labeled files by camera angle, and wrote down the exact order of events while it was still fresh. Adrian did the same thing from his side, a clean timeline, minute by minute, focusing on actions the cameras might not fully capture, like when requests were made, what was refused, and when the supervisor took over. They treated it like evidence, because that's what it was. A heavy nighttime approach can get rewritten fast inside agency paperwork. The fastest way to prevent that is to force the agency to match its internal story to clear video. The next move was formal, not emotional. Adrian and Julia started filing through channels that generated tracking numbers. They did not rely on a phone call that could disappear into, "We'll look into it." They filed written requests and complaints that create a paper trail. Records requests for body-worn camera footage, if any existed, dispatch logs, operational briefings tied to the case number, and documentation showing why that team had been sent to that address. They included the dates, the times, and the supervisor name they had captured. They also filed a complaint focused on conduct, not ideology. The core points were simple and hard to defend. The lead agent applied pressure before verification, refused to present the warrant promptly in a recordable way, and treated lawful questions as non-compliance to force a homeowner into a disadvantageous position. They attached still frames showing the vehicle's setup and lighting, and they referenced the exact moment the warrant was finally displayed, and the address mismatch became undeniable. In the days that followed, the neighborhood part became a factor too. The neighbor who recorded from across the street contacted the Pierces privately and provided their footage. It wasn't dramatic, but it strengthened the timeline. It showed the vehicle angles, the lights, the team's posture, and how long the encounter lasted before a supervisor arrived. It also reduced the agency's ability to claim the Pierce's edited context, because there was an independent angle. Julie handled communication the way people do when they've seen institutions try to isolate a story. She didn't blast it online first. She shared it with counsel and kept copies untouched. She documented who received what and when. She treated every transfer like it could be questioned later. Adrian, because of his role, kept his public footprint controlled. He didn't go to social media. He didn't give interviews in the first week. He did what he expected any careful person to do. He let the record assemble itself and let the process force answers. That process forced contact quickly. Within a short window, the agency's response shifted from silence to structured engagement. That's what happens when a complaint can't be dismissed as confusion or exaggeration. The footage showed the approach clearly, and the warrant mismatch was visible. The delay in presenting the warrant wasn't a rumor. It was time-stamped. An internal review opened, not because the agency wanted public embarrassment, but because the documentation made denial expensive. The review focused on 3 things that are hard to explain away. First, the address verification failure. A team had surrounded the wrong house with a warrant that did not authorize contact at that location. Second, the decision-making at the door. The lead agent prioritized control and compliance language before verifying legal authority at the threshold, then delayed presenting the warrant in a recordable way. Third, the escalation posture. The approach looked like a raid setup, even though this was a residential contact with no immediate threat on record. As that review moved forward, another layer kicked in, matching the paperwork to the video. This is where agencies often get caught. Reports tend to smooth rough edges. Time gets rounded, tone gets softened, refusals get reworded as attempts, but video doesn't negotiate. The Pierces had captured the sequence, repeated requests for the warrant, repeated pressure to step outside, and the supervisor's change in tone. Any narrative that ignored those elements would conflict with evidence. Harlow became the central problem inside that process because the decision points were attached to him. He was the one driving the sequence. He was the one framing verification as non-compliance. He was the one trying to pull Adrian into the yard before showing the warrant. Kessler's involvement mattered too, but in a different way. Her arrival was the moment procedure returned. The team only produced the warrant in a recordable way after she took control. That made her look like the person cleaning up a mess, not creating one. The Pierces' strategy stayed consistent. They didn't ask for apologies. They asked for documentation. They requested the incident number. They requested the case references. They requested confirmation of which office authorized the approach. They requested what training and guidance existed for nighttime residential contacts, and whether address confirmation was required before attempting to compel a resident to exit a home. They also requested corrective action information, not because they expected the agency to volunteer discipline details, but because asking forces the agency to respond in a way that can be compared against outcomes later. Weeks passed, and the situation didn't quietly die the way the team likely expected when they drove away. The issue wasn't just that the team hit the wrong house. It was how they behaved before verifying it was the right house, and how much they relied on pressure to skip the part where a warrant is supposed to justify authority at the door. As the review progressed, the story began to circulate in professional circles and local community circles. People who had dealt with similar late-night approaches recognized the pattern immediately. Some people called it a mistake. Others called it what it looked like on camera, procedure treated as optional until someone forced it to be mandatory. And the agency couldn't keep it contained because the Pierces didn't let the record stay informal. They built a trail that required responses, tracking numbers, and documented positions. By the time the agency realized this wasn't going away, the question had already shifted. It was no longer only about an address mismatch. It was about whether an enforcement team could show up at night, flood a home with lights, push a resident to step outside without producing the warrant first, and then retreat quietly when caught at the wrong door, without consequences. That's where the case started moving toward a resolution that would cost real money and force policy changes, because the footage left no room for the usual escape routes. Once the internal review started, the case stopped being a neighborhood story and became a documentation problem for the agency. The Pierce attorneys requested the operational chain behind the deployment, who approved the approach, what address data they used, what verification steps were logged, and what guidance existed for nighttime residential contacts. The agency could deny opinions, but they couldn't erase timestamps, radio traffic, and written logs if those were requested the right way. Freedom of Information Act and records responses started coming back in pieces. Some pages were redacted, some items were not located, but enough details surfaced to show the structure. The team had moved on a target name tied to an address, and the address verification step failed before they ever put vehicles on the street. The next failure was at the door. The lead agent treated verification requests as delay, pushed for compliance first, and only produced the warrant in a recordable way after supervision arrived. That sequence made the case hard to defend because it wasn't about a split-second decision. It was a series of choices over minutes, all of it recorded. Depositions and interviews focused on what the cameras showed. The questions were simple: why the warrant wasn't presented promptly, why the team posture was so heavy for a residential contact, and why the lead agent kept trying to pull the homeowner outside before confirming legal authority at that specific address. Agent Travis Harlow became the center of the accountability because the escalation decisions traced back to him. Supervisors and agency counsel looked for ways to describe it as a misunderstanding, but the video didn't match that framing. The footage showed pressure first and verification later. Supervisor Dana Kessler's role was different. Her arrival was the moment the team stopped pushing and started checking. That didn't erase the earlier conduct, but it made it clear who was driving the problem before she got there. The review findings didn't stay vague. The agency could argue intent, but it couldn't argue behavior. The documented issues were consistent across the footage and the timeline the Pierces wrote immediately after the situation. Those findings created two outcomes at once: discipline and settlement pressure. On the discipline side, the agency moved to contain risk. Harlow faced consequences tied to decision-making and procedure. Details weren't all public, but the direction was clear. His conduct became the example of what not to do because it created liability and made the agency look like it used intimidation to skip verification. On the civil side, the case moved toward resolution because the evidence made trial exposure dangerous. A public courtroom timeline with clear video, verified timestamps, and a warrant address mismatch doesn't just cost money. It forces testimony about policies, training, and how often these wrong door approaches happen. The case ultimately resolved with a reported $10 million settlement, structured in a way that didn't require an admission of wrongdoing, but did require the government side to treat the incident as serious enough to pay and adjust procedures. The policy tightening mattered more than the money. After the settlement, guidance around nighttime residential approaches was updated with clearer requirements that aligned with what the Pierces demanded from the start. Address verification before deployment using more than one source, documented in the case file. Warrant presentation at the earliest safe moment, in a way that can be recorded by body-worn camera when available. Supervisor involvement earlier, when a resident requests verification and the team can't immediately provide it. None of that fixed what happened, but it reduced how easily the same playbook could be used again. For the Pierces, the long-term change was personal and practical. They didn't become public figures. They didn't turn the incident into a constant media cycle. They used the system the way it's supposed to work: preserve evidence, build a record, force responses, and make it expensive for an agency to pretend nothing happened. When authority shows up at your door, the calm person who keeps it procedural often has the most power in the room, because procedure is what the system is supposed to follow. Cameras, timestamps, and written requests don't create drama. They create accountability. Now ask yourself this. If a team arrived at your home late at night and tried to make you step outside before showing legal authority, what would you do? Would you move first just to make it end? Or would you hold the line and build the record? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've had a situation where someone in power tried to skip steps and rush you, share what happened. And if you want more stories like this, realistic, modern, and focused on accountability, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one.
Hey, stop right there. What's in your hand? Put it down.
It's my cane. I'm legally blind. I needed to walk.
What's in your back pocket?
Tell me why you stopped me.
Name and date of birth, now.
I'm walking home. I came from jury duty.
Answer the question, name and date of
I
birth.
will cooperate, but I need the lawful reason first.
You're refusing. That's a problem.
The sidewalk outside that small Florida town was still washed in streetlight glow when they approached him. Early morning, thin traffic, the kind of quiet where a single patrol car rolling up feels louder than it should. Harold Briggs, 61 years old, legally blind, Army veteran, was tapping his cane along the concrete and heading home after jury duty. He wasn't running, wasn't hiding, wasn't bothering anyone, and within seconds, Deputy Lacey Monroe treated the one thing helping him walk like it might be a weapon. Her cruiser spotlight pinned him in place. She came in fast, focused on the cane and the outline of something in his back pocket, talking like she'd already decided what he was. Harold tried to explain, calm, direct, consistent, that he was legally blind, and the stick was a mobility aid. Monroe didn't de-escalate. She pivoted into demands: name, date of birth, compliance on her terms. That was the moment the encounter stopped being about checking on something and became a control contest. And whether the stop truly began over a crosswalk signal, or whether that reason was built later to justify what happened, would become a central issue once the video and the paperwork started getting compared side by side. At this moment, we want to tell you that we're incredibly grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Tell us where you're watching from, your country, your state, your city. And if you like stories where power trips get exposed by policy, cameras, and consequences, hit like and subscribe. Now, rewind, because this did not start with Harold doing something dangerous. It started with one deputy choosing suspicion first and patience last. Harold's morning was routine. When you're legally blind, routine is how you stay safe. Same route, same pace, cane out in front, listening for cars, feeling the curb cuts, moving like someone who knows how quickly a simple walk can turn into a problem if people don't pay attention. The night before, he had been doing what the system asked him to do: jury duty, long hours, controlled environment, a lot of waiting. Then he went home, rested, and set out again early, when sidewalks were emptier and the world was quieter. That's when Monroe saw him. Later, the official story would point to an alleged crosswalk violation tied to a traffic control signal on October 31st. But in real time, what Monroe acted on was not a traffic safety concern. She acted like the cane was suspicious, and the item in his back pocket was a threat. This is how a normal situation gets turned into a high-stakes one. An officer's fear becomes a fact on the spot, and the citizen is expected to play along with that fear no matter how unreasonable it is. Monroe approached with officer safety posture, treating Harold like someone who needed to be managed. She demanded personal information immediately. Harold answered what he could and explained his disability. He kept his body still, kept his hands visible, and kept the cane in the same position it had been the entire time, doing its job. Monroe didn't settle down after hearing he was blind. She doubled down. She treated the explanation like a story she didn't trust, and she treated the refusal to hand over personal details on command like defiance. Harold didn't escalate his tone. He escalated his clarity. He pressed for the lawful basis of the stop and made it clear he didn't believe he was required to provide ID without one. He also did the one thing people are told can help when a stop feels wrong. He requested a supervisor. That request flipped the dynamic. Instead of treating it like a normal oversight step, Monroe treated it like a challenge to her authority. Her posture tightened. Her commands became sharper. The encounter stopped moving toward resolution and started moving toward punishment. And as that shift happened, a bystander across the road noticed the spotlight and the way the deputy kept crowding the conversation. Early morning doesn't have distractions. People hear everything. The bystander pulled out a phone and started recording, not getting involved, not yelling, just documenting. 2 recordings were now building at the same time. The body camera capturing Monroe's framing and the bystander video capturing the broader context and tone. Then Sergeant Todd Klein arrived. This is where a lot of agencies either prevent disaster or seal it in. A supervisor can step in, slow the pace, clarify the reason, and end the contact cleanly. Or a supervisor can back the deputy's ego and turn a questionable stop into a locked-in, "you're going to learn today" moment. Klein chose the second path. He didn't reset the encounter around facts. He treated Harold's calm resistance to demands as a respect issue. He reinforced Monroe instead of asking why a legally blind man with a cane was being handled like a threat. And with the supervisor now aligned against him, Harold was no longer dealing with one deputy's assumptions. He was dealing with a chain of command that refused to step back. When Sergeant Todd Klein stepped in, he didn't come with a reset. He came with alignment. He listened to Monroe's summary first, and her summary wasn't neutral. She framed Harold as suspicious and uncooperative. She repeated the same 2 points that she had been stuck on since the cruiser light hit him: the cane in his hand and the object in his back pocket. She treated both like potential threats, even after Harold had already explained he was legally blind, and the stick was a mobility aid. Klein's first move wasn't to verify Harold's condition or ask what specific law justified the detention. His first move was to reinforce the idea that Harold needed to comply because they said so. That's how the chessboard got set. Harold stayed calm and kept doing the same thing he'd been doing since the beginning. He asked if he was being detained, what the legal basis was, and whether he was free to leave. He also made it clear he wasn't refusing to cooperate in general. He was refusing to hand over personal identifying information without a lawful reason. Monroe and Klein treated that distinction like a technicality they could steamroll. Monroe kept repeating commands, tightening the circle around Harold. She kept repositioning to control his movement on the sidewalk. She talked in a way that made the interaction sound more dangerous than it was, using language built for reports and radio traffic rather than for solving a real problem in the moment. Harold's body language didn't match their escalation. He didn't square up. He didn't clench fists. He didn't step towards them. He stood there, cane visible, shoulders still, explaining the same facts again. Legally blind, walking cane, coming from jury duty, trying to get home. Klein's next move was to turn the disagreement into refusal to obey. He didn't argue the law. He argued authority. He treated Harold's questions like a challenge to the badge, and that's the line that changes everything. Because once an officer makes it about authority, the goal stops being public safety and becomes submission. Monroe then shifted to the pocket item. She demanded Harold reveal it. Harold tried to explain it wasn't a weapon and that he wasn't reaching for anything. He also made it clear that sudden grabbing and forced movements were dangerous for him because he couldn't visually track what they were doing. That warning didn't slow them down. It made them more impatient. The bystander across the street kept recording. That mattered because you could hear the pattern. Harold asking for the reason, Monroe and Klein refusing to answer cleanly, then repeating commands as if commands could replace a legal basis. This is the exact point where a stop either ends or turns into a manufactured charge, and they went for the charge. Klein told Monroe to move forward with enforcement based on what he said was non-compliance. Monroe stepped in closer and reached towards Harold's arm area, trying to take control of his positioning. Harold reacted the way a blind person often reacts when someone suddenly grabs them without warning. He stiffened, pulled his arm back slightly, and shifted his weight to keep balance while still holding onto his cane. That small defensive movement was the opening they wanted. Monroe immediately labeled it as resistance. Klein backed her, treating the moment like proof that Harold was actively resisting, even though the conflict was still about whether they had lawful grounds to detain him in the first place. This is the trap. They move from a disputed detention to a sudden physical control attempt, then claim the person's natural balance reaction is resistance, then retroactively declare an arrest to justify the force. Harold kept his voice controlled. He told them he was not attacking them, not reaching for anything, and not trying to run. He emphasized again that he was blind and that they needed to stop grabbing him without explaining what was happening. They didn't stop. Monroe and Klein closed in and forced his arms behind him. From Harold's side, it wasn't a fight. It was confusion plus balance plus pain, and the basic fear of being controlled by people he couldn't visually track. From their side, they described it as him resisting their attempts to arrest him. But the argument that later blew up publicly was simple. If the arrest itself was not lawful at the moment they claimed resistance, then resisting arrest became a label they used to cover the escalation, not a legitimate basis for it. They cuffed him. Monroe kept control of the narrative out loud, calling it active resistance and officer safety. Klein supervised it like it was routine. Harold was then guided toward the cruiser. He moved slowly because he couldn't see the door angle, the curb edge, or where their hands were on him. Instead of giving him clear directional guidance, appropriate for a blind person, they treated his slow movement as more defiance. Everything he did got interpreted as a problem. The bystander's phone caught enough to show the tone and the sequence, a cane treated like a threat, a lawful basis question treated like disobedience, and a supervisor who didn't slow anything down. By the time Harold was placed in the back seat, the stop was no longer being sold as concern about a pedestrian crossing. It was being sold as a resisting arrest. The moment Harold Briggs disappeared behind the closed cruiser door, the story split into two tracks. On the street, it looked like a legally blind man with a cane got treated like a threat and taken in for resisting. On paper, it would soon be described like a routine enforcement action that started with a traffic control issue and escalated because the subject refused to comply. And that gap between what people saw and what the report claimed became the real problem. Within days, the body cam clips and the bystander recordings started circulating. People weren't just reacting emotionally. They were pausing, replaying, and comparing. They focused on the order of events, the cane being treated as suspicious, the repeated demand for name and date of birth, Harold explaining he was blind, and the moment the supervisor arrived, and the encounter tightened instead of calming down. That's when the "how did this start" question got louder. Because the arrest report's justification didn't match the public's first impression from the footage. The written version described the stop beginning because Harold allegedly entered a crosswalk against a traffic control signal on October 31st near a small town outside a major Florida city. But the video attention centered on something else: the deputy's fixation on the cane and the pocket item, and the fact that the stop didn't sound like a simple traffic safety reminder. That mismatch mattered for two reasons. First, it went straight to whether there was a lawful basis to detain him in the first place. Second, it raised the ugliest question in policing: whether the report was written to defend an outcome rather than document reality. Harold's side, through advocates and people speaking for him, emphasized basic facts. He was legally blind, the object was a cane, he was coming back from jury duty, and he asked for a supervisor because he didn't believe the deputy had a lawful reason to demand identification. The broader argument was that resisting arrest became the catch-all label once the interaction turned into a control fight. The sheriff's office didn't treat it like just public noise. An administrative investigation opened. That process moved the way these processes usually move: body cam review, supervisor review, policy comparison, interviews, and a careful focus on whether the deputies followed standards for detention, escalation, and civil rights. And this is where the pressure shifted from social media outrage to institutional risk. Because when video is public, the agency can't pretend it's just one person's word. The agency has to defend not only the arrest, but the decision-making that led to it. Every command, every radio update, every justification line becomes evidence. In Harold's case, the investigation didn't end with a clean defense of the deputies. It ended with sustained findings. The administrative investigation concluded on November 7th, and the sheriff's office sustained policy violation findings against both Deputy Lacey Monroe and Sergeant Todd Klein. Klein, the supervisor, got the heavier discipline: immediate demotion, a 7-day suspension without pay, and a 2-year block on promotions or favorable personnel actions. He was also ordered to complete remedial civil rights training. Monroe received a 2-day suspension without pay and was also ordered to complete remedial civil rights training. The sheriff also indicated Harold could provide a sworn statement later depending on his availability, which signaled something important. The agency was building a record, but wasn't treating Harold's direct testimony as the urgent centerpiece from day one. That detail didn't sit well with people who felt the harm was obvious on video, and the burden shouldn't have been on the victim to fit in a statement later. As the discipline became public, the response wasn't relief, it was backlash. The core criticism wasn't that discipline happened. It was that it didn't match the seriousness of what people believed they watched. A legally blind veteran being escalated into an arrest after asserting boundaries and asking for a supervisor. The supervisor, instead of protecting the public from a bad stop, allegedly normalized it and helped finish the escalation. That's why the commentary around the incident framed it as a leadership problem, not a single deputy mistake. A culture issue where supervisors reward aggression and treat calm pushback as disrespect. Then came the sharper allegation that the arrest report itself was part of the wrongdoing. People asked why the policy violations didn't include stronger consequences if the written report described a start point that didn't align with the footage being discussed publicly. The phrase "violation of oath" started getting used in the conversation, along with demands for accountability beyond short suspensions. And now the sheriff's office was trapped between two realities: an internal process that had delivered discipline, and a public that believed the discipline proved the agency knew it was wrong, but still chose to keep both personnel employed. When the sheriff's office released the discipline, they expected it to close the file. Instead, it opened the loudest phase of the story. People read the penalties and did the math. Sergeant Todd Klein lost rank immediately, sat out 7 days without pay, and got a 2-year freeze on promotions and favorable personnel actions. Deputy Lacey Monroe got 2 days without pay. Both got ordered into remedial civil rights training. The agency also said Harold Briggs could provide a sworn statement later based on his availability. And the public reaction wasn't, "Good, they handled it." The reaction was, "That's it?" Veterans groups focused on one fact. A legally blind Army veteran ended up handcuffed after explaining his disability and standing firm on basic rights. Disability advocates focused on another. The cane was treated like a threat, and his limitations weren't accommodated in a way that reduced risk. Legal commentators focused on the structure of the encounter. A disagreement over identity demands turned into a physical control attempt, then got labeled as resisting arrest, even though the whole dispute was whether he was lawfully detained or lawfully under arrest at that moment. And then there was the leadership piece, because the supervisor's job in that scene should have been to slow things down, clarify the lawful reason, and end the contact cleanly if the reason wasn't solid. Instead, the supervisor reinforced the escalation. That's why the commentary you referenced framed it as a culture problem. Not just one deputy getting overreactive, but a supervisor normalizing that behavior, backing it, and helping turn it into an arrest. That's what made the punishment too light argument stick. Critics didn't just want harsher penalties. They wanted separation. They argued that when someone's independence tool gets treated like a weapon and the encounter ends in cuffs, retraining and short suspensions don't fix the core issue. They framed it as a message to the public. If this is what it takes to get only a demotion and a few unpaid days, then the standard is broken. The arrest report became the other pressure point. The report's stated starting reasons centered on Harold entering a crosswalk against a traffic control signal on October 31st. But the public-facing clips and discussions centered on something else: the deputy's fixation on the cane and a pocket item, and the repeated demand for identifying information while refusing to clearly state a lawful basis in a way that matched what viewers believed they were watching. That created the suspicion that the report was written to justify the outcome rather than document the true start of the stop. People asked a simple question: if the agency sustained policy violations, why wasn't there equal accountability for the accuracy of the written report? If the narrative in the report didn't match the public record, why wasn't that treated as a separate, serious issue? That's where accusations like violation of oath got thrown around in public discussion, because to ordinary people, a report that looks inconsistent feels like the system covering itself. The sheriff's office, by disciplining both employees, effectively admitted the conduct didn't meet policy. But by keeping both employed and focusing on remedial training, they also signaled they were treating it as correctable behavior rather than disqualifying behavior. That split decision is exactly what kept the story alive. Meanwhile, Harold didn't come out of it with a viral win. He came out of it with the reality of being treated like a threat while doing something normal, and the reality that the system's response moved slower than the harm did. In the weeks after, he leaned on routine again. That's what people like him do when something knocks them off balance. He stayed close to familiar paths. He coordinated with advocates. When he was able, he prepared to give his sworn statement as the sheriff's office indicated. He also spoke with legal counsel, because in cases like this, the civil rights questions don't stop at discipline. They extend to unlawful detention, disability accommodation, and whether resisting was used as a cover for a stop that shouldn't have escalated in the first place. And something else happened that agencies never love, but communities rely on. Other people started speaking up. Local residents talked about stops that became confrontations because someone asked basic questions. Disabled community members shared how often mobility aids get treated with suspicion. Former law enforcement voices weighed in on what supervisors are supposed to do and how quickly a scene can turn when a deputy and supervisor both interpret calm boundary setting as defiance. That collective response is what forced the deeper change conversation. Because the real long-term consequence wasn't just one demotion and 2 suspensions. It was the public demand for clear policy and enforceable standards around how officers handle mobility aids, how they communicate and guide people who are visually impaired, what counts as a lawful basis for detention, and how resisting gets charged when the underlying detention or arrest is disputed. Even if the agency didn't announce sweeping reforms on day one, the pressure created a new reality. The public was watching the paperwork, not just the video. People were comparing the report to the footage. They were asking why the supervisor didn't reset the encounter. They were asking why the deputy escalated after hearing the words, legally blind. They were asking why the system still treats asking for a supervisor as a provocation. And Harold's case became an example people used in other conversations, other hearings, and other complaints. Not because he wanted fame, but because it showed the pattern in a clean way. A routine walk became a power contest, then got wrapped in official language to make it look normal. The lesson was blunt. Rights don't protect you if asserting them automatically gets treated as hostility. Oversight doesn't work if supervisors treat every citizen question as disrespect. And accountability doesn't feel real if the consequences don't match what the public can plainly see. So here's the question for you watching. If you were Harold, calm, standing still, explaining you were legally blind, what would you have done when the demands kept coming without a clear, lawful basis? And if you've ever had a normal moment turn into a control struggle with someone in authority, share what happened in the comments. Because people learn from each other's experiences. If this kind of story matters to you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that staying calm and staying firm can change outcomes. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you can keep getting stories where the truth holds up under video, policy, and accountability.
Sir, stop. Who you are. I need identification.
What's the reason?
Don't worry about the reason. Give me your ID.
I can be verified. I'm federal law enforcement traveling on official
You
paperwork.
don't look like federal.
I'm telling you, verify me.
You don't get to tell me what to do.
Hands behind your back.
2 airport police officers at Chicago O'Hare thought they could stop a black man in the terminal, ignore his federal paperwork, and turn a simple verification into a public takedown with 0 consequences. What they didn't know was that the calm man they decided to flex on wasn't a random traveler they could push around. He was an FBI special agent returning from a federal mission, traveling on official documentation for a scheduled follow-up briefing. And the moment they put hands on him, they created a problem that would not stay inside that terminal. At this moment, we want to tell you that we're incredibly grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Now, before we rewind, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your country or state in the comments. And if you watch stories where people stay calm, facts win, and accountability actually happens, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. This started at around 9 a.m. inside Chicago O'Hare International Airport when the terminal was already moving fast. Morning flights, families dragging luggage, business travelers walking with purpose, gate agents calling names, and that normal airport noise that makes people tune everything out unless something looks serious. Caleb Rivers stood out for one reason only. He didn't look stressed. He moved like someone on a tight schedule, but fully in control. He had official travel documents and federal credentials because he was coming off a federal mission and heading toward a scheduled follow-up briefing. He wasn't wandering, not looking around suspiciously, not causing any disruption. He was doing exactly what airports are built for, getting from point A to point B. That's when airport police officers, Derek Vaughn and Evan Klein, stepped into his path. They didn't approach like they needed help identifying someone. They approached like they'd already decided the outcome. Their posture and pace signaled it. Vaughn led, Klein backed him up, and stayed close enough to make it clear this wasn't going to be a normal, quick check. Rivers stayed composed and immediately tried to handle it the clean way. He attempted to show his federal credentials and the official travel documents connected to his briefing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to walk past them. He did the thing professionals do when they know procedure matters. He offered verification. Vaughn did not treat it like verification. Instead of taking a breath and looking at what Rivers presented, Vaughn dismissed it. He treated Rivers' calm questions as if they were disrespect. He framed Rivers' tone as a problem, not the situation. This is one of the oldest power moves in these encounters. If the person stays calm and asks for clarification, you label it attitude so you can justify escalation. Rivers tried to keep it on track. He attempted to explain he was returning from a federal mission and traveling on official paperwork. He attempted to redirect them to the simple solution: verify the credentials, confirm the documentation, and let him continue to his scheduled briefing. Vaughn did the opposite. He turned the interaction into a contest. The more Rivers tried to keep it procedural, the more Vaughn treated that as defiance. Vaughn talked over him. Vaughn positioned himself closer. Klein mirrored the stance, giving Vaughn the confidence of a second body, a second uniform, and the implied threat of force. And while all of that happened, the cameras were already in play. Both officers had body cameras. Rivers knew it. He also knew what body cameras do when people remember they're on. They either keep officers honest, or they document how far someone is willing to go when they think they can control the narrative anyway. Around them, travelers started to notice the change in tone. Airports are full of small moments people ignore. This didn't look small. People slowed down, some glanced and kept moving. Others stopped because they saw a man trying to show paperwork, while two officers acted like paperwork didn't matter. A business traveler near the edge of the scene raised a phone. Another person stepped sideways to get a clear view. That's also how modern accountability works. When someone sees an encounter turning wrong, they start recording, not to be dramatic, but because they've learned how quickly the story changes when only one side writes the report. Rivers stayed composed anyway. He didn't perform. He didn't argue just to argue. He tried to keep the situation anchored in facts: credentials, documents, scheduled briefing, official travel. He tried to make it easy for them to do the right thing. Vaughn treated that calm as a challenge. Instead of calling in a supervisor or running a quick verification, Vaughn escalated to detention. That decision mattered. Verification is procedural. Detention is control. Detention is what you do when you want the person to feel the power, not when you want the truth. Klein didn't slow it down. He supported it. He didn't insist on looking at the documents himself. He didn't step back and say they needed to verify first. He stayed in formation with Vaughn, reinforcing the message that Rivers wasn't going anywhere. In a busy terminal, that shift is instant. People hear the tone change. They see the body language tighten. They see hands move closer to belts. They see the circle forming. And when the subject stays calm, it makes the escalation look even worse. Rivers attempted one more time to present his federal credentials. He attempted to get Vaughn to take them seriously. He attempted to keep it from becoming physical. He attempted to keep it from becoming a scene. But Vaughn had already moved past verification. Vaughn treated Rivers' questions as a reason to punish him. The officers closed distance. They positioned themselves like they were preparing for compliance, not conversation. And this is the part most people don't understand until they see the footage later. Once an officer decides calm is attitude, the situation becomes rigged. Anything you say can be labeled non-compliance. Anything you do can be called resisting. Even standing still can be framed as refusal. Rivers stayed steady. He didn't swing. He didn't shove. He didn't threaten. He didn't do anything that would justify force to the people watching. Vaughn and Klein moved anyway. Travelers were now fully watching. At least one person was recording with a clear angle. The officers' body cameras were capturing the audio, the pacing, and the exact sequence of choices. And Rivers, in that moment, understood something that Vaughn clearly didn't. This wasn't going to end with a simple airport report. Because the second they put him in a detention posture without verifying the federal credentials in front of them, they weren't just making a bad stop. They were creating evidence. And the next move they made was the one that turned a tense interaction into a public incident that would pull supervisors, command staff, internal affairs, and federal eyes into the terminal. The moment Vaughn decided this was a detention, he moved like the paperwork didn't exist. Rivers stayed where he was and kept his hands visible. He didn't try to run, didn't lunge, didn't step into either officer. He kept repeating the same basic point through calm, procedural language. He could be verified right there, and the documents were in front of them. Vaughn treated that calm like a challenge. He told Rivers to turn, and he framed Rivers' attempt to explain his arguing. Klein closed in at the same time, taking the position that turns a stop into a two-person control hold. This is where a lot of these encounters go sideways, and it's not complicated. If the officers had wanted verification, one of them would have stepped back, looked at the credentials, and radioed it in. Instead, they moved to physical control first, like the goal was compliance and embarrassment, not truth. They forced Rivers' hands behind his back. Rivers did not swing or fight. He tensed like any person would when strangers grab their arms in public, but he did not strike anyone, and he did not attempt to flee. That didn't matter. Vaughn and Klein used the moment to justify taking him down onto the terminal floor, right in the middle of the foot traffic. People nearby reacted immediately. Some backed away fast. Others froze. A few started speaking up, but most did what modern travelers do when they see something that looks wrong. They recorded. Lila Chen, a business traveler who had already been watching, kept her phone steady and aimed low enough to catch the hands, the takedown, and the cuffs. She didn't narrate for attention. She recorded because she understood what happens when there's no footage. Other phones came up too. Different angles, different distances. In an airport, that means something important. You don't just get one version of events. You get a timeline from multiple viewpoints, and through all of it, the officers' body cameras captured the same thing the public did. Rivers offering credentials, Vaughn refusing to treat them as real, and the decision to escalate before verifying anything. Vaughn and Klein placed Rivers in handcuffs while he was on the floor. They held him there long enough for it to become a scene, not just a stop. Travelers walking past started slowing down, not because they were curious, but because something about it didn't match what they were seeing. Rivers still didn't panic. He kept his voice controlled and stayed focused on the same points. He was a federal agent. He had official travel documents, and this could be resolved with verification. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't begging. He was staying professional even while he was restrained in public. That contrast is what made Vaughn look worse in real time. When someone is calm and the officers are escalating, the crowd reads it fast, and Vaughn didn't help himself. Instead of switching into verification mode, once the cuffs were on, he doubled down on control. He acted like the documents were irrelevant and pushed the idea that Rivers' calm pushback was disrespectful. In that moment, the bias didn't need a slur to be visible. It was in the way he refused to accept the simplest proof right in front of him. The commotion pulled a supervising sergeant toward them. Monica Hale arrived with the posture of someone who didn't want a story, just answers. She didn't stroll in slowly. She came in with urgency, because the scene already had phones pointed at it, and because she could tell from the crowd's reaction that something had gone off the rails. Hale's first move was the move Vaughn should have made from the start. She demanded to see Rivers' credentials and his travel documentation. Rivers provided them immediately. Hale reviewed what he had and verified what it said. She didn't treat the paperwork like a prop. She treated it like what it was: official documentation tied to federal work and a scheduled follow-up briefing. Within seconds, Hale confirmed Rivers was legitimate. And once she confirmed it, she didn't play the quiet cover-up game. She challenged the justification for the stop and the level of force used. She focused on the obvious question: why did this become a takedown when verification was available from the beginning? Hale's next move showed she understood the stakes. She called the duty chief, Captain Lawrence Mercer, and requested an immediate response to the scene. That call changed everything, because when command staff arrives, the goal shifts. It stops being about winning the moment and starts being about protecting the department from a documented mistake. And this one wasn't just a documented mistake. It involved a verified FBI special agent in a major international airport, with multiple videos already being created by the public. Captain Mercer arrived and assessed the situation fast. He didn't need a long briefing. He didn't need officers to spin it. He saw the cuffs. He saw the crowd. He saw the phones. He saw Hale holding paperwork that should have ended the stop before it ever got physical. Mercer immediately removed Vaughn and Klein from direct contact. He ordered all camera footage preserved without alteration. He made it clear the body cam video, audio, and any relevant surveillance clips were to be locked down. He didn't leave room for misunderstanding, and he didn't give anyone time to get cute with technical issues. Then he opened an internal investigation on the spot. Mercer also notified federal contacts, because this wasn't just a complaint from a traveler. This was an incident involving a confirmed FBI agent on official travel, detained and handcuffed in public after presenting credentials. That's the moment the power chess game flipped. Vaughn and Klein had started this thinking they controlled the outcome because they controlled the stop. But they didn't control the recordings. They didn't control the supervisor who showed up and refused to rubber stamp the story. And they definitely didn't control a duty chief who understood what federal scrutiny looks like. Hale ensured Rivers was brought up from the floor and that the cuffs were removed once his identity and status were verified. The tone around Rivers changed immediately once Mercer took command. People didn't suddenly become kinder. They became careful. And Rivers didn't celebrate. He stayed composed. He didn't threaten anyone. He didn't posture for the crowd. He did what a professional does when the truth is finally acknowledged. He let the process start, because now the evidence was secured. By the time the scene settled, everyone involved understood this wasn't going to be handled quietly. There was body cam footage capturing the escalation. There were civilian videos capturing the takedown. There were witnesses in the terminal. And there was a supervising sergeant and a duty chief who had already created a paper trail that would force accountability. Vaughn and Klein were done controlling the narrative the second Mercer ordered that footage preserved. Once Captain Mercer locked the scene down, the airport didn't treat it like a routine incident anymore. It moved straight into damage control mode, and not the sloppy kind. This was the kind where leadership knew the footage would speak louder than any report. Within hours, Vaughn and Klein were removed from active duty and placed on leave while the department started formal reviews. Internal Affairs took over the primary investigation on the department side. At the same time, because the detained person was a verified FBI special agent on official travel, federal contacts were notified, and the incident triggered immediate outside scrutiny. That mattered for one reason. It stopped anyone from trying to shrink the story into miscommunication. The evidence trail was already heavy. There was body cam footage capturing the approach, the refusal to properly review documents, the escalation language, and the timing of the decision to go hands-on. There were civilian videos capturing the public takedown and the cuffs on a crowded terminal floor. There were witnesses who didn't know Rivers personally, and had nothing to gain from stepping forward, which is exactly why their statements carried weight. And the department had another problem: prior history. As Internal Affairs built the case file, they weren't just looking at this one moment. They pulled prior complaints, use of force reports, and any patterns tied to Vaughn and Klein. Even when older complaints hadn't resulted in discipline, they still showed how often an officer ended up at the center of the same kind of incident. That's how termination-level cases become hard to defend. It's not just what happened once. It's what keeps happening. In the days that followed, the incident spread the way these stories always spread now: fast, clipped, and wide. A short civilian video hit social media first. Then other angles surfaced. Then people started comparing timestamps to the department's initial public messaging. That's when pressure rises, because it becomes less about opinions and more about contradictions. Reporters began calling the airport police department for comment. Travelers posted their own accounts about the moment the scene started and how quickly it became physical. A few said they initially assumed the officers had a strong reason, but changed their view when they saw Rivers trying to present documentation while the officers stayed focused on controlling him instead of verifying him. Behind the scenes, the department's legal team pushed one priority above everything else: preserve every piece of footage, preserve every log, preserve every radio call, preserve every report version. Because any gap would look like tampering, and tampering would turn a serious case into a career-ending scandal for leadership too. Captain Mercer did not leave that to chance. He kept the chain of custody tight and treated the Bodycam handling like an evidence locker issue, not a PR issue. Sergeant Hale's actions mattered in the investigation more than people realize. She arrived, demanded credentials, confirmed legitimacy quickly, and challenged the escalation. That created an internal record that the stop could have been resolved through verification. It also removed the most common defense officers use after a bad encounter: the claim that nobody knew and everyone acted reasonably based on confusion. Because Hale proved it wasn't confusing, it was ignored. While Internal Affairs did its work, Rivers did his. He documented everything from his side immediately: timeline, purpose of travel, the follow-up briefing he was scheduled to attend, and the fact that he had official paperwork and credentials available at the moment of contact. He also identified witnesses who were willing to provide statements and made sure the civilian video record wasn't treated as online noise, but as evidence that matched the body cam footage. Then the civil rights track began. Because this wasn't just about embarrassment. It was about a stop that escalated into force and detention after a calm offer of verification with strong indicators that bias influenced the decision-making. Rivers moved forward with a federal civil rights claim, supported by the footage, witness statements, and the investigative record that followed. As the parallel reviews progressed, Vaughn and Klein didn't just face a slap on the wrist. They faced termination-level discipline. The department had to evaluate policy violations around escalation, use of force justification, conduct, and the refusal to properly verify identification when it was presented. That's where certifications come into play too, because when an officer is found to have used unjustified force or made a stop that crosses civil rights lines, it can trigger consequences beyond one department, including decertification risk, depending on the outcome and the state's standards. This wasn't the kind of case where they could quietly move someone to a different shift and call it retraining. The evidence made that option look like a cover-up. The department also faced institutional consequences because leadership had to answer a bigger question. How did two officers feel comfortable escalating that fast in a busy terminal with cameras everywhere? So the policy side changed. The department was pushed into tighter oversight on bias-related stops, use of force thresholds, and body cam accountability. Supervisors were given clearer intervention requirements, especially in high-visibility public encounters. Verification procedures were tightened so that when official documentation is offered, officers are expected to take specific steps before escalating. Body cam preservation rules were reinforced with stricter penalties for any delay or mishandling. They also had to address the attitude problem without calling it that in public, because everybody watching already understood the pattern. Calm questions were treated like disrespect, and that label became the excuse to escalate. Rivers did not walk away from it like it was just another bad day. He stayed professional, but he didn't let the incident get minimized. He pursued accountability through documented facts, not emotions. That's what gave the case strength. His calm in the moment, his organization afterward, and the amount of independent evidence that matched his account. And the most important ripple effect wasn't even about Rivers. It was about every traveler who watched that video later and recognized the moment where this could have ended peacefully, but didn't, because two officers chose control over verification. It reminded people that documentation matters, recordings matter, and supervisors who step in with backbone matter. Because when oversight actually shows up, power stops being a weapon and becomes a responsibility again. So here's the question for you. If you were in that terminal and you saw a calm person offering credentials while officers escalated anyway, would you record? Would you speak up? Or would you keep walking and hope it wasn't you next? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever experienced something similar, share what happened and what you learned from it. And if you want more stories where facts win, accountability follows, and people don't get to rewrite what happened, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.